Mentors, when you meet with couples, they are going to have conflict over specific issues. I mean, who doesn't? And our job as mentors is not to solve their problems, but rather to teach them tools and ways to be able to help them solve their own problems. It helps to be able to recognize that there's different types of problems, and you can talk about them slightly differently. There are problems that you can solve, and there are problems that you have to manage. Let's talk about solvable problems first, and I'll give you an example. Early in our marriage, Michelle and I used to fight over what happened when we got home. See, she would want to get dinner fixed, and so she'd be in the kitchen, and I just wanted a break. So I'd go sit down and read or maybe watch a little bit of TV. And that would get Michelle irritated, so she'd get angry at me because she felt I wasn't helping out. And I would react and say something like, look, I just need a break. I've been working all day. And we would fight over this. And my response actually would even make her more angry. So after this went on for quite a while, and then we started to talk about it, and we had two different perspectives. See, she wanted to come home and get all of her work done so she could relax. I wanted to take a break, and then I was willing to go back and work. So when we figured that out, we thought, oh, well, I'll tell you what, Michelle, you come home, you fix dinner, and then you're done. I'll take a break, and then I'll clean up the kitchen. And for the most part, that's what we've been doing for the rest of our marriage. That's kind of the way that we worked it out. So that was a solvable problem. So let me give you some characteristics of solvable problems. It's focused on a specific issue. So it's, in this case, it was what happened when we got home from work. And it can be solved by understanding the two different perspectives and then brainstorming actions. So how do we take our two different perspectives, mold them together into some kind of compromise? And oftentimes, not that we don't fight about it, but oftentimes these are not complicated to solve once we can really understand and then brainstorm what the actions are. Now let's talk about perpetual problems. Well, John Gottman, who's one of the top marriage researchers, his research has shown that 69% of problems that couples have are perpetual problems, meaning you're going to fight about this over and over and over again, and you may never solve it. So that doesn't mean that you're going to be in an unhappy marriage. Very satisfied marriages and have perpetual problems, but they have just learned to manage to the problems. And I like to think that there's even a few different types of perpetual problems. And so the first one that I want to talk about is what I call the pet peeve. So I like a clean countertop. And I don't know why, I just do. And Michelle doesn't seem to notice. And so she'll come home and she'll put her purse in the middle of the counter and just kind of leave it there. And it irritates me. So I would say something like, politely at first, I'd say, would you please put your purse away, not on the countertop? And she would usually do that. But guess what? Next day, exact same thing. And this would keep going on. And then I would get less polite. And I'd say, put away your purse. And she would kind of grudgingly do it, or sometimes we would fight about it. See, I've come to understand that this is my problem. The more I tried to escalate it, Michelle just didn't hear it. And so what am I going to do? Am I going to divorce her over a clean countertop? And then I started to understand even deeper. See, I grew up responsible for cleaning my own bathroom. And it wasn't all that hard to put my toothbrush and toothpaste away. And so I felt kind of good about it. And so that's my family of origin. Now, Michelle grew up 4 siblings and her parents sharing the same bathroom. So there was always a mess on the countertop. And she grew up thinking that that was normal. So we had 2 different perspectives. You see, it didn't really change her behavior. What it turned into is she's probably not going to change. Now, she does get a little bit better at this, but I have started to see my job as the countertop cleaner. So I've had to accept this about her, and I no longer get upset about it. This is my problem. This is not her problem. And oftentimes with pet peeves, there's a certain amount of acceptance that eventually we just have to come to, that this is the way it's going to be. But there are deeper perpetual problems. And these are often caused by maybe some basic personality characteristics or deeper triggers. And sometimes these triggers are based upon our own insecurities. So here's some of their characteristics. As I mentioned, it might be just different personality characteristics. Something like introvert versus extrovert. You're just going to treat things a little bit differently. They're oftentimes rooted in our childhood, and they can go very, very deep. And oftentimes they have something to do with some of our insecurities. So when that perpetual problem happens, we react. Maybe we even overreact. Now, if your perpetual problem is about one of these deeper issues, negotiating who's going to clean up the dishes isn't really going to help. You need to get to the deeper issues and deal with those issues. When we talk to couples and they're stuck, we'll talk to them about, is this a perpetual problem or a solvable problem? And I think it helps them to recognize there's two of them. So some you can negotiate a solution for. Some you're just going to have to manage with some understanding. And happy couples have these same issues, and they learn to be able to manage them. But sometimes it comes down to the serenity prayer. It's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So here's some tips. Recognize if it is a solvable problem or a perpetual problem, and there's a difference. And if it is solvable, you can negotiate a solution, but if it's perpetual, talking about dishes isn't necessarily going to help. So you can manage it with understanding, and when you start to understand your partner's triggers and emotionally how they react to something, it's going to help you to understand how to be able to treat something differently. And it gives you more compassion and empathy for them. Decrease your poor communication behavior. So oftentimes the issue isn't the issue, it's how we communicate about the issue. And so work on your poor communication behaviors and decrease those. And finally, accept the things you cannot change. So if there's some basic personality issues, like introvert versus extrovert, then it's going to be, how are we going to handle it when we go out and you want to stay out with people and I want to go home? And coming up with ways to be able to manage to your basic differences. Those 4 tips again are: recognize if it's a solvable versus a perpetual problem, to manage with understanding, to decrease the poor communication behaviors, and accept what you cannot change.